Good morning from Berlin. If I sound a little coarse and am a bit slow, I apologize. I was out much later than expected last night. But thank you for joining me. Today's Q&A is on shame. Now, this was pretty intense. I got hundreds of responses. So it's going to be a slightly different format today. I'm also going to try to give things a little bit more of a format when it comes to these things that I do every month, starting with a little bit of news, moving into why I choose things, and then going into your questions and or sharing. And I will try to also give a little bit more of a cohesive thing right at the end in terms of how I apply things for the topic in my life. So, shall we start with the news? My latest news is that I won the award I mentioned last time, which was the Sexual Freedom Award for Worker of the Year. And I had 12 of my greatest people in London there to celebrate it with me, which was great. And other news is that I'm in Berlin because I am the face of the German Fetish Ball this year. So I would love to see you there if you are around or nearby. So I could probably flesh out the news segment a little more, but this is the first time, so that's good enough for now. So why did I choose shame? I chose shame because I recently, the movie that I was in was recently released called Grief Encounter, and it deals with some pretty difficult emotions, including grief and the things that surround grief itself in the context of, in the film, death. And so death, sex, grief, pretty heavy and intimate and difficult things to toy with. And so I was thinking, all right, I want to maybe start to dive into more difficult aspects emotionally when it comes to these Q&As. So I understand that shame is a big topic. So I wanted to do this first because I don't know why. Because on a level I'm a masochist. That, and also somebody called Connor, a friend of mine who's actually in Berlin this week, mentioned to me a while ago about shame and how we could use it in play, and how maybe this trend within certain communities about transcending it is maybe not necessarily the perfect thing. So we can go into that as well, and I'll tell you what I think about that maybe towards the end. So if you're watching after this, you might want to fast forward because I know attention spans are not huge sometimes. Okay, so first, this is going to be a little bit different as opposed to just choosing your questions, because I did literally get hundreds and hundreds of responses, including in my DMs. So I'm going to try to group things a little bit. So first up, maybe I'll choose one to see if it could, do I want to? So I think the most common thing that we do find is that most people do not want to share who they are with people because they fear that they're going to be judged. And all of us tend to want to be in cohesion with the social circles around us. So let's see. Do I have anything that is very... So this one attacks maybe two different things that I've been seeing in all of your responses. So let's see. So keeping it a secret from friends and others, being a submissive. So this is kind of two parts that I've seen in patterns in everything that you've given me. I have notes today. I never have notes. And look how formal it's getting. I don't know if I like that. But yes, so societal norms. So a lot of responses, I'm just going to read out a few. So it's not fitting in with societal norms. I'm stigmatized. Societal norms. Don't want to be judged. Scared of people thinking I'm weird. I'm afraid other people reckon us as insane. Afraid of the judgment of others. So yeah, we want to fit in. And in general, a lot of society already doesn't even want to talk about sex, let alone explore ideas around that challenge heteronormative white cis het men's perspective, at least what is definitely portrayed and reportrayed in the media. And so we need to do things that support our understanding of ourselves and letting that come forth and letting that find people who support that around us. So I'm going to like litter in a little bit of who I am and where I am with this also. So when I first started working in this industry, I kept everything on the down low, including the kink aspect, including the work aspect, including everything. I was very, I didn't show my face. I was very, very much hidden from the public. And that actually, the process of that took years. I didn't just come out to do these Q&As once a month, straight up. It took a lot of me understanding myself, why people had hangups about it, why I internalized those hangups, and what I could do to explore why and how I could support myself. And how I ended up doing that was not necessarily by force or by choice, but it was kind of lucky that I was working because I was constantly surrounded by people who had this dialogue that was more open and they were playing and practicing and experiencing life together with this framework already. So it was a community essentially, and that slowly brought it out of me. And then they brought these questions and I started to speak to people in my life and they would judge me. And then I started speaking to who I thought could support me, which were kink-friendly therapists. And I started to understand a little bit about why I was not comfortable sharing it. And that is very much an internalized whorephobia and internalized slut shaming. And some people, some of you mentioned this to me, that maybe I don't feel this because I'm so out. But actually, I've been through a very long process of maybe 10, 11 years of trying to understand and reframe and support myself. And it's an ongoing process because most of society doesn't support that process and doesn't support challenges to the little boxes. And this, of course, is magnified in different ways when it comes to different cultures, religions, backgrounds, family cultures. And yeah, it's a crazy intense process that some of us are luckier to power through than others for however many reasons that are not necessarily our own doing. Actually, they're never our own doing, in my opinion, up to a certain point. And then, yeah, so don't fret if you are at the very beginning of this, or if you feel like you have to redo it, rejig it, like every day. It's this constant battle almost of being human. And I guess later on we'll get to how I try to make fun of it. Not to laugh at it, but to make it a fun process. Yeah. So, and then there's a second part to this statement, being a sub. So I think this can be different for different people based upon how they feel that they need to present. So a lot of the times I got a lot of things here. Questioning my manhood. Will the other person feel that I'm weak? I feel very ashamed of sissy kink because it's wrapped up in gender stereotypes, because I'm a submissive sissy and society believes that men should be masculine and dominant. And also submission felt like the antithesis to independent feminism at the time. So I think that there's a lot of expectations that we put upon ourselves and that society loves to proliferate. And so these definitely contradict a lot of our desires and the things that we find joy in. And I think what I do is that I remind myself that society exists because of these structures and these rules that are created is a very important term, to make us be able to function in large groups. And so we have to understand that these created rules were created and that we can challenge and recreate them if we wish to. And we can do that on our own, which takes a lot of battling. We can do that in communities, which is more helpful. And yeah, and therefore that community awareness, that internalized understanding can start to come out in communication with those that may not understand as well. And or sometimes you gotta cut people off. At least that's how I feel. I feel that sometimes it's just too severe an incompatibility, and it doesn't matter how long they've been in my life. Some people, I've just had to move on because of their lack of acceptance. I don't necessarily need great understanding, but it's just like, this is the way that I've found life works for me, and you don't want to accept that. I don't understand why this exchange should even exist anymore, is kind of how I see things. So, yeah, I think everything kind of comes back to that understanding of self, that sitting yourself in community in whatever way that you see will form well for you, and letting that slowly trickle out into your life. All right, so let's see. I wish somebody had written this one in public, because I don't see it something here. I think it was a private DM, but let's see. Where are you? Give me something here. All right. I am going to close this one and just read it out to you. So it says, I'm hoping that this isn't going to be too long. Let's see. It's been 15 minutes already. Okay. It says, some of my favorite little responses were, I'm a bit scared of how kinky I am. Oof. And I don't know exactly. I think that I feel shame because of a general sense of depravity. So now, these are very personal, internalized perspectives that these people gave to me. Thank you very much to everybody who responded. And I mean, I say it with a smile. I understand that it can be really tough experiencing those thoughts upon yourself. And I think how I translate those thoughts when they have happened in me, is that one, I learned to be kinder to myself. So it's kind of like me thinking that thought and me thinking, all right, I see that you've had that thought. That's cool. You have that thought. And then, and the second one is to lean into the sense of fear and the sense of depravity, and to kind of let that morph into my emotional state and to play with that. So I guess this kind of offshoots into how I integrate it in the more fun ways. So I think that play and this scene in negotiated formats, it definitely gives me an opportunity to lean into these tougher emotions and to lean into how I can bring them out of others. So how I do that is probably this meditation practice that I've had for a while, and that has taught me to sit with very difficult emotions and just let them be. But actually, when it comes to play, I've not only sat into them, I've kind of seen what they feel in me and how they translate into who I can be in the world, which I think I've said that may not be the point necessarily, but maybe it is. Who knows? I haven't studied it that much. But I found it a lot of fun. And to let it burn an aggression and a rage sometimes, these things that maybe we're not allowed to feel, and to let that come out as a question or come out as a scene that I want to have, has been a lot of fun for me also. So I think that when it comes to shame, when it comes to feeling like a depraved human being, when it comes to fear of these aspects of ourselves, I think that with our own selves and within partners and within communities, we can give them a voice. You can even just say what they are, and maybe like brainstorm, negotiate, think about ways about how those can be integrated into a scene. Let that kind of sit with you for a little while. And let it be within just an hour, let it be within 2, let it be within 3. And then sometimes I feel like it can help to translate back in to our self-acceptance and into our comfort with the realization that we are challenging a societal norm and that it's seen as not okay for reasons of what they call lack of social cohesion, but how it actually might be useful to be aware and sit with those things, and it might actually make for a better society, in my opinion, to be comfortable with uncomfortable emotions and states of being. So that was quite a lot. Maybe I'll just try to go straight to the old-fashioned format. I feel like I did a lot of like thinking and noting and writing and speaking, and I probably covered quite a lot of things in that time. But I'm going to do some old format stuff, yeah? So, how do you deal with your own shame, or when has shame come up in your work? So I've already told you a lot about how I deal with my own. So when has shame come up in my work? I think it's mostly come up around when I've had to share it with others, when I've had to share my work with what I do, and when I, less around the sexuality, but more around the fact that I do the work, because people don't understand what it's like for a woman to claim their own bodily autonomy and for somebody to monetize their time as much as sex workers understand the importance of that. And so, yeah, I had to come to those understandings first before I was able to communicate them, and that can be quite difficult. So, yeah, that's when it's come up for me. Okay, I did get a lot of these also. So a lot of things to do with religious backgrounds. So I'm just going to go through some of these. Christian upbringing, traditional values of not hurting others. That's a very interesting one. I'm not sure how to reconcile them with my upbringing and life view. I feel like I'm betraying my religion when I submit, which I guess in this context causes shame because that's the Q&A topic. It causes me extreme anxiety that I'm idolizing someone as opposed to what? God? And then, this is a very difficult one. I would say that I want to talk to the traditional values of not hurting others. I think there's something to be said for understanding that people are asking to be in these particular positions, and that it creates a sense of relief. And talk about diving into the deep end. But there's also something to be understood at the creation of these beliefs, these belief systems, and the understanding of why they were created and when they were created, and how that can inform you about how reframing and your own moral compass works, as opposed to abiding by specific rules that have not been thought about. So I think I might leave that at that, because it's a fairly huge topic to attack, and maybe I will do that again, because I have tried to attack that topic before in a separate thing. Yeah, okay. Let's see. And then there's a lot of things about this kind of transcends two things. So if you're a mom, so that's the role that people expect you to play, and want to be sexual, it's frowned upon. I would say often, maybe in general, they again back to the women's bodily autonomy. I'm a parent and a sex worker. To be honest, no. So yeah, that's again a lot about society bearing down upon you, and you accepting those roles that it gives you, and having to function within these communities and finding different ways to do it. And I don't think that there's necessarily one way. I don't think that there's necessarily a way to be fully out or there's a need to. I think it's an individual understanding of where your life is, where your comforts are, and where you're going to go with that. So, as we're nearing half an hour with your incredible, incredible questions, I'm going to just do a couple more, and then I want to get down to how I actually integrate shame into my play and what I feel that it's done for me and the people who serve me. So, I really like this one. So, okay, that can't be shared, but essentially it is a question about humiliation kinks. So, like this person says, forced femme. Let's see. I don't know if I have necessarily so many notes about that, but I did see it happen a few times. I guess this kind of veers off already into how we can play with things. So I would say that humiliation, out of the topics that I've done on these Q&As so far, humiliation is crazy on top of the getting a response list. And and that probably speaks to how much people are interested in engaging with feeling humiliated, with feeling into that sense of, oh, I'm so ashamed of that, and I have to be subjected to feeling into it. So I guess that kind of speaks to itself. And that takes me to another point that I have on my notes over here. So there's a hell of a lot of people who are leaning into humiliation play, I think because it kind of relieves them of the responsibility, or it forces them into a space that they're very interested to go into, but with coercion, with a force that gives them maybe a bravery to face that sensation, to face that emotion. So I think that that's also kind of how I play with shame, with a sense of humiliation. For me, it's a sense of facing yourself, and it's a hugely brave thing to do. And I think in the context of play, it can be made a little bit faster so that the mind doesn't understand where it's sitting and can kind of push into it a little bit more than you could maybe do outside of play. Okay, so how I do that is I usually I like to attack that sensation no matter what people are coming towards me as. If I'm going to have a relationship with somebody, I kind of always like to go into that headspace at the beginning, whether it's a trickle or whether it's a and that is for me because I find that all of these elements of shame, of things that we're ashamed of things that we're hanging on to really tight, can be barriers to how I like to connect, how I like people to see themselves in order for me to be able to be around them in a more cohesive fashion. How I do that is I pick up these little things that I see them hanging on to, and I just speak it to them, in the context of an understanding space, and I kind of see where they're at in order to be able to accept that or not. And so this is things that they just do in session maybe, and how they are moving this, what they're doing that, how they feel about this. And depending on the person, you say it in different ways, in ways that they may be ready for. And then incrementally, maybe more challenging ways. And that's kind of how I integrate a little sense of tackling that shame, a little sense of playing with it and sitting with it and feeling a little bit like naughty with it, as opposed to a big wash. Sometimes a big wash can be fun, but I also believe that sitting, having a community, a sense of self, a sense of inner understanding and strength, a sense of a support system, whether that's internal or external, is very important when it comes to really starting to toy with these things. So feeling into that, who am I? Like, what is this? Am I ashamed of that? I am ashamed of that, but I can see somebody who's like laughing and enjoying it. And it touches on all of these different things that can push into some pretty dark and difficult areas. But I think with the support system can kind of transform into this really fun experience of shame. So that's how I approach it. I hope that I explained that as well as I could. Write any questions if you have down below later on. And look, I'm doing really good on time. Okay, so I think I got through a lot of what I wanted to get through. Maybe I'll go a little bit more into my own story. I'll have a little look at the questions. You're all submitting incredible questions, incredible statements. Thank you so much. I had to group a lot of things because I saw huge patterns. And so if I haven't pulled up your individual question, do I apologize? But that is why. So I'm going to have a little scroll to see whether I covered different angles as much as I could. So things when it comes to challenging gender norms, we've kind of touched on that. Touched on being submissive. Yep. Submissive men. Kind of touches on that too. Isn't it so that shame is one of the biggest playgrounds of BDSM? I just kind of spoke to that, but I'm going to leave that question up because that is communicated very beautifully and talks to the point better than I did. Okay. I think I did cover quite a lot of things. Yeah, somebody speaks to, since I came out as being into feminization, I've gotten a lot of criticism. I think I've probably covered that from a few angles. Now, yeah, so I think I did okay. What do you think? Considering what a beautifully important topic this is. I love playing with shame since I've dealt with the underlying trauma. So I saw that repeated also. A lot of people who do transform trauma into play, and sometimes feeling shamed about that, or in this case, somebody playing with the shame itself. The human mind and how we're configured is extremely complex, and I think that our experiences obviously are all valid, and about understanding them and noticing that they are repeated patterns for many people are probably a very nice place to begin to sit with them and to maybe even learn to enjoy them, to understand that these spaces, these very complex perspectives that are sometimes contradicting are just very normal. And they're very much shared, even if you don't hear people talking about it. Life is very difficult, often, and very complex. And sometimes I just have to sit with that understanding and not do anything with it. Yeah. And just be with it. So that's kind of how I approach that. Okay. You're all amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. This is really beautiful. Okay. Oh, this one is challenging. Oh, this one's new. This one's challenging. All right, I'm going to try to attack this one. And then I think we'll have to move on. Where did it go? I guess that this is from a private account. So this person says, what are your thoughts on SM within the gay or lesbian community? How do you extract a woman's shame or fear of same-sex and sexual domination? Same-sex and or sexual domination? Just your general thoughts on this would be fascinating. My goodness, this is like a whole other Q&A, isn't it? Maybe I shouldn't tackle this right now. Okay, so I did touch on this a touch when it comes to somebody who was very kind enough to share. Submission felt like the antithesis to independent feminism at the time. So that kind of maybe comes to a point in this. And then there's same-sex interactions. And this is not something that's replicated across the genders, across the ways that we are interacting. And I think I spoke to that maybe at the beginning when it came to understanding that these are rules that have been created and that we need to understand them. I would say that I'm going to apply this directly to how I would play with it if I saw this come towards me, which I have, as opposed to what I think everybody should do with it. Yeah? Because this is seriously a whole other Q&A. How I have kind of interacted with this when it came to people who wanted to interact with me, but who feared it because they saw us as the same sex, was and their internalized homophobia. I kind of gently questioned into it, and gently being the operative word, because I think my approach around that understands the weight and the complexity and how terrible it can feel, despite all the reasons of it not necessarily needing to be. And letting the interactions be slow and building it up from there. That's kind of how I've come to people who have had that fear, whom have moved towards me. Letting it be a slow and communicative process. And then when it comes to a woman interacting with their own sexual domination. I've spoken about this a lot across the board, and that would be that a little bit of what I also mentioned at the beginning about this internalized sense of how I should be in the world. So I'll talk to that a little bit. I always had a very assertive approach, and I think I noticed that it was very challenging for the world around me. And before I found femdom, I would often shut my mouth and let other people think that they were leading scenarios and situations. And now I think I have better communication tools in order to assert myself. And I definitely still play a little bit into managing people's egos, but I do that less. And that has just been something that's come incrementally over time and practice and reinforcement that it is actually something that is appreciated within certain sectors. That reminds me of something that somebody else has shared. So let's see. A lot of other people. They said, I only felt ashamed depending on who I was considering sharing it with. I felt a fear of rejection, but I've learned to pick better. I was ashamed when I was unaccepting, denying myself of my own self. That's a little bit of a deviation, but I kind of mixed that in there. And now I see thousands of other men who also have that fantasy to submit to a woman. It feels good to let myself have my fantasies. So I think even if you don't necessarily want to connect with a community, I think it can be very useful to be out on the internet and to understand that, these patterns of conflicting thought, of what we believe is our conflicting thoughts and expressions of our desires, and or things that we're ashamed of, are things that are out there, and that sometimes you can learn that you could accept them because of how much they're proliferated and therefore somewhat actually a normal human experience, or you can interact directly with that fear in and of itself. And these play spaces can be a beautiful way to feel that shame and to understand that we have this opportunity to sit into these deep corners of what we're told not to lean into. And that can be a beautiful thing that these play spaces can give us. So yes, thank you so much for being here through me, through all of this. It's been a heavy one, and I've spoken to many, many things. I've seen everything that you have given me, and I very much appreciate it. It was literally hundreds of small and huge responses. And there was no time in this to share how incredible you have been. And thank you so much for your continued engagement. And I will see you next month for the next Q&A. I wonder if it's going to be as heavy. I do like the heavy things. So thank you. Have a wonderful May. And whoever's in Berlin, I would love to see you at the German Fetish Ball. I will be there. My face is on every poster and every ticket. So you will see me regardless. Bye.